501 Cast, information you need from experts we trust.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our 501 Cast. My name is Emma Bennett. I'm the Account Executive and Vice President of Nonprofit Resources, and I'm excited to welcome two very special guests. We have Desi and Steve, and I will let them introduce themselves. I also want to preface that none of us are legal or health experts, but we are here to provide some guidance and perspective when it comes to hosting events. And this is for, specifically, we have Steve Baden with RESNET. He's the Executive Director of RESNET, and they are hosting an industry conference. Desi is with Emergency Concierge International, and she's providing the guidance of safety and health requirements for that event. So they're going to provide some really good perspective. And Steve, if you don't mind, I'm going to kick it off with you. So if you could start by introducing yourself, but also tell us a little bit about the process of what you've decided to do for the RESNET 2022 Building Performance Conference.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you for the invitation to present today. I think the best description of the process is from a Grateful Dead song, which was "What a Long, Strange Trip It's Been." We just come out of a very successful in-person conference in 2020, which was a matter of just weeks before the pandemic struck. And then we had a very successful virtual conference. But the problem is, because of the size of our conference, we have to book hotels many years, and we had contracts that we really had to do. So seeing how successful the virtual conference is, but also understanding that people would like to get out, we needed to think about it. So in about April or May, we started thinking about 2022. And at that time, everything looked good. It looked like the first two waves of the virus was kind of calming down and plateauing, and that things would be looking more normal. And our annual conference is in February. And so we thought the idea is that we'd go, but we wanted to, it was still there. So we decided to do a survey of all the past attendees of our conference and just see where their heads were, what their expectations were, what their fears were. And it was kind of interesting, the results of it. You had a pretty much close split between those who are not comfortable in getting in an airplane and having a mass meeting, and that preferred doing a virtual conference. Then you had another set, which is probably even more passionate, that wants to get back to life and normal and do the networking and learning and the face-to-face encounters that a conference lets. So that gave us a good perspective of where things were. The other thing we asked people was that if you went to an in-person event, what was your greatest fear? And by far, those people who wanted to have a live conference, greatest fear was being in a room with people that were not vaccinated. And again, I'm going back now to last spring. And so that forced us to make a decision. And pragmatically, we couldn't back out. We had a contract that would cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars just to suddenly back out. And then also we were in the state of Texas, which has its own kind of interesting perspective on the pandemic. So we were basically stuck. And so we weighed the actions, and then we decided to come up with the ideas that we would have two conferences. A live conference that would take place in February in Austin, Texas, and then a virtual conference that would be more like the virtual conferences people are aware of. And so we proceeded that. We decided that instead of having a hybrid of virtual and in-person, we would actually have it two events at two different times. So we're going to have one event, the in-person event in February, and then the other one in the virtual one in March. And so focusing on the in-person event, and the other thing we felt is a moral obligation to be as healthy and safe as possible with a pandemic in this country. So we contracted with ECI to come up with some advice on the best of the state-of-the-art in terms of public health in the conference. And we got some pretty sound advice, and we came to the realization as staff that we would do several things. Again, remember now, this is back in May when everyone thought the light was in the end of the tunnel. And so we we decided that we would first of all have it a mandatory vaccination requirement, that in order to be able to come to be registered for the conference, you actually had to show documentation that you were fully vaccinated. The second one was, and this is a real difficulty in the live event, is that as much as possible, having social distancing. So chairs would be 6 feet apart, the dining area would be 6 feet apart. And so that sort of was the structure that we went to. And then finally, we were very concerned about the issue of public health and then privacy. And so we decided, instead of having RESNET receive the documentation with a for the vaccination, we contracted with a third party called VAL, that the person would just, who wanted to register, before registering, would send in copies of their vaccination card to this group, and then they would mark it into the database that they were vaccinated, so that when the person registered, if they weren't on that list of vaccinated people, the system wouldn't let them register. And so that's the best we can do. There's no perfect answer to it, though. I mean, it's every day the rules change, and it's just kind of hard to plan. I think the main thing we did, which was wise, was we decided let's going to err the side on public safety, and we then presented this proposal to our board of directors, and they actually voted to have the two separate events. So that's where we are now.
Wonderful. Yeah. And one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning of this call is I kind of wear two hats. I work for Nonprofit Resources, but I'm contracted to help plan RESNET's events. So Steve, Desi, and I have all been fine-tuning this process. So Desi, in terms of, well, first of all, I would like you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about ECI, and then jump into maybe defining the risk of hosting an in-person event, and including what you've seen RESNET do for their event. What are some of the other things that other associations or event planners need to consider?
Absolutely. Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's awesome to see faces today. And so we're ECI, Emergency Concierge International, and we were founded in 2017 with the premise of all hazards emergency planning. And that's kind of a, frightening term for a lot of people that aren't familiar with what goes into that. And so that's been the focus of the organization from the beginning. And my background is, in the meetings industry, and I'm actually in business with my husband, and his background is on the public safety side. So we kind of bridge, that gap together and can come together and provide planners with resources in a way that you can understand it, but then still, have that high level overview of, what you need to do on site for addressing all hazards, safety management and security. Now enter COVID, right? And so whether we like it or not, we're COVID kind of logistics and, all hazards options there, and kind of working with customers on COVID response plan, which is super important to have your actual kind of written plan and have everybody be on the same page with how you're going to respond to it. And also meeting clients where they are and defining risk and exploring risk and talking about what's, I like the word you used, Steve, pragmatic, what's actually possible. And those are kind of like the things that we use when we're working with clients is, what's your budget, first of all? What's your position? What's the position of your attendees? Because that could be different, and we want to make sure our attendees want to come, right, to the conference. So there's a lot of different things kind of to put in the blender and shake it up to get your secret sauce, right? And it's not cookie cutter by any stretch. So, some of the things that RESNET and Steve are doing are fantastic. And, those conversations are important to have, such as, are you, as a conference organizer, do you have the ability to process that data on your own? And most of the time, if you're requiring vaccines or you're requiring tests, we've seen conferences require vaccines solely or, tests solely or both. And we've also seen conferences require none at all. And so it just kind of depends on that conversation. But having a technology in place is super, I think, important to protect the planning side and also your time, because now, as you mentioned, a lot of planners are having those virtual events too, and that is like planning 2 events. So I'm sure it's helpful, Emma, that your virtual isn't until March, right? So it's after, so you've got a little time to recoup. But yeah, that's something super important to focus on. I call it kind of like laying the foundation with your executive team, your board of directors, your planning staff, really like what you did, Steve, and making sure that everybody's on the same page. And you kind of do have to gauge your audience and take it a little bit to a vote and see the people that we're trying to serve here, what do they want? And how are we going to get them there? And what protocols do we need to decide on in advance in order to make them comfortable to, make the decision to travel and to register? And it's, I think, Steve, you did a great job with that, because you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't ask the questions, you're not going to know what you need to do in order to make people feel as comfortable as possible. So some other things that we've seen, of course, digital health questionnaires, which, is technology based. There's a lot of options out there, and that's just a matter of reminding people what the signs and symptoms are, and just kind of maybe daily or maybe once during registration, getting them to check in a little bit with themselves. Like, you know what, actually, I'm not feeling so good, so maybe I am going to pause and go get tested or stay in my room, or, what have you, but just be reminded, that I think is a great opportunity to include like your risk waivers. And we talked about not being lawyers, right? So we have to be cautious on that. But at this point, everyone needs to understand and agree to the fact that they are traveling at their own risk. And, obviously you're going to do what you can as much as possible, right? If you're a conference organizer, but you cannot put a safety net, around everybody, unfortunately, and wish that you could, but it's just not the case. And so kind of getting back to that life is normal, and you're taking the risk on yourself in order to attend the conference, and hopefully you're comfortable with attending based on the communication and the protocols. And if you're not, then we've got to be sensitive to that too. So temp scanners are something that we've seen also. I think they're phasing out a little bit. When you look at kind of like the science, and if you're going to detect COVID, it's not probably happening from a temperature scanner, but sometimes there's a lot of optics in the process, and people need to see different things happening, and that creates a comfort level that makes them feel better. And so, that's something that you can consider. It all depends on budget and, how much you want to spend on all of those different technologies. So I'll just pause there. I've got lots to say on protocols, but I want to make sure that we are, bouncing around a little bit and keeping the audience interested. So.
Absolutely. No, and I think that you have so much great info to share because you've seen it across so many different clients. And I think you're exactly right. Nothing is cookie cutter, except for the fact that we all have to be flexible and trying to coordinate and figure out. And I think, one thing, thinking of risk, there's always inherent risk attending an event with or without COVID. There's always weather and travel delays and anything. Event planners are built different in terms of how they can manage flexibility, right? So Steve, thinking about the protocol and everything that RESNET set, how has the response been from the network at large, and what feedback have you gotten from your stakeholders?
It's mixed, I'll be honest with you. Like the rest of the nation, our organization is split on its perspectives on vaccinations. We have a number of people that are very passionate about the fact that there should be no vaccination requirements. And then you have other, so you have this balancing act that you have to do. And that was one of the things that compelled us to do two different conferences. So we can tell a person who wants to go and partake in a educational opportunity and professional development credits opportunity, that they can get that without having to leave their home. And that and it'll matter if you just don't feel safe traveling, don't want to get on airplanes, or you don't believe or want to subject yourself to any of the safety protocols, you still have the same opportunity of doing it virtual. And then the other thing is that since we split it in two and we were going to follow the health procedures, we decided that limited what we had to do into itself, because with the hotel facilities that we have, we could only do a meeting of 400. And that is more than half of what the size of the previous conference was. But it does prevent some opportunities. The other thing we spent a lot of time in Emma and I worked on a lot and thought about was, what are people who are traveling with these uncertain times wanting to see? And one of the things we came up with is that no one's going to risk the public health now in this type of situation to spend 3 days sitting in a chair and watching PowerPoint presentations. So that forced us to rethink on exactly what we would do. And one of the things of the research we did is that people really wants to travel is not to see the PowerPoint presentations, but to interact. They've been holed up a long time, and they really missed this human interaction. And then also, one of the biggest parts of a conference really is the networking. Getting to go in touch with the leaders of the industry, getting new ideas, sharing some symmetry, and building esprit de corps. And so we took that in heart. And so we cut the number of sessions we were going to do, and we cut the size, the time of the sessions, and we tried to create as many networking things so those would make it worth their while and understanding why people are traveling and what they're looking for. But there is no right answer on that. It's a split. There's a controversy. There are people really upset that we're doing this. But at the end of the day, I think it's what from my personal viewpoint, it's the sleek factor. If we're going to err on what side, what's the best side to be erred on? And it just, in my mind, there was just no other option but to be the best, the best practices in having public health and safety as the key paramount thing. That means it's all, but it doesn't mean it's all or nothing. And I have to say, we'll talk about a little bit later, but having two conferences is and I think Emma really could testify, it's a royal headache, because there's several things wrong. You're more than doubling your work. You're really confusing your speakers because they're going to have to be somewhat virtual, somewhat. And then the other thing is, frankly, you're competing with yourself, because one of the mistakes I think we did is we put our virtual conference too soon after the in-person conference. So what we're doing is doing a joint marketing plan, which in some respects is competing with each other, getting people to enroll for the live session and getting people. And if I had to do it over again, I would put a bigger team between it so you could focus on one event, get that done, and then focus on the other. But in these times of the split people, I think that, and I think a lot of people, and I have to say that in terms of education, which is another important part of the conference, it's probably the second most important, is getting that information. What's the latest trends? What can you do better? That is essential. And one of the things that's nice about a virtual conference is we can see that, for instance, our virtual conference last year almost doubled the attendance of a in-person one. So a lot more people got those educational purposes. So it is a challenge. That's what we came through. I'm not going to blow smoke up and say everyone was happy, but I don't see, with as divided as this country is, and the confusion with the pandemic and just this idea this can't just ever end, I don't think it'd be realistic to expect there would be a one unified view on this.
Right. Yeah, and thinking about that too, the divide in the country and everything, I think no matter what side you're on, you're going to have some people upset, no matter what. I think if you have completely lax protocol, if you have very stringent protocol, somebody's not going to agree with it, and that's completely fine. But I think that RESNET did a very smart thing in hosting two events, and definitely a learning process, and we're going to fine tune it for sure. I think one thing that I will just make mention of in terms of hybrid versus two separate events, I'm very, very grateful we're not trying to stream the virtual event at the live conference. We at least have a little gap to catch our breath between. But Desi, kind of throwing it over to you, what is your advice, I guess, in terms of when you set protocol, there's going to be a reaction, regardless of that's a positive, negative. Event planners, organizations, businesses are going to get a reaction from their stakeholders. And so what is your advice, and what is the best response that event planners and organizations can have prepared?
I think the best advice is, well, first of all, understand, as we're talking here, that you're going to offend somebody. You're going to ruffle some feathers, no matter, what you choose. You could put on an event with no protocols and have people very upset that you're being irresponsible, or the flip side, you could be extremely stringent with your protocols, and then people, maybe aren't comfortable because you've got your mask police and they're being hounded, and that sort of thing. And so I think a lot of times it's coming down to the type of organization that you are. And then, you're seeing both sides, and then also split groups too. And then you've got to go with your, your board of directors and your executive team, and then also your planning staff. So the people that are going to be really involved in making it happen, and see what they're going to be comfortable with. Because, for the planning staff, for example, you've kind of got the highest risk, right? If you're at registration, if you end up doing a normal registration process, which people are coming up with creative ways to not have the lines, right, and kind of like the corralling situations. But let's say you do that, you're kind of at the most risk, and then you're also so important to that whole, execution. And so making sure that you've got your contingency plans on if people on your staff do get sick and what that looks like. But I think, like I said, polling your audience is going to be super huge, defining the questions, understanding how much things cost, and then looking at them and seeing how is it going to be to actually execute them. You might say, for example, that you're going to require masks, and then you realize very quickly on site that you didn't have a plan for the requirement or the bandwidth for people to enforce, and it gets very uncomfortable very quickly. And so you're looking at, all of those different things, and everyone needs to, come together and voice their concerns and their questions, look at the budget, see what you can afford, how you can execute it, look at obviously your meeting space, and there's going to be potential financial burdens there, right? So getting creative with that, solution as well, and then deciding as a group what is the best way to move forward. And like I said, you want to speak to your attendees, because at the end of the day, that you want them to attend, and making sure that they understand what your direction is from the beginning. And quite honestly, sticking to that direction is going to be extremely important, unless something changes significantly for us, right? As a matter of public health, and then we'll take that guidance, and then also understanding that everyone's got to be a little flexible too, because things do change. You might send one communication out today that says something, and then 5 weeks later it could change, and we're just kind of at the mercy of that right now.
That's so true. And I think, before we even started the webinar, we were talking about it's just so hard to even keep track when the CDC is even kind of changing the requirements as we go of what different safety measures we need to consider. Steve, I guess if there's one piece of advice that you could give to other organizations or organizational leaders, CEOs, executive directors who are planning on hosting live events in 2022, what would it be?
Actually, I have a couple, because I tried to figure out one and I just couldn't decide the winner. But I'll kind of put them in order I think of importance. And as Desi said, you're going to have tough skin, because you're not going to please everyone. And this is an issue, and it's public health that everyone is passionate about. And so you're just going to have make the decision and be as safe as possible. We took an approach where you can have your cake and eat it too, if you will. We're having a virtual as well as a live. The other one I have that may not seem apparent to people, but if you're going to conduct an in-person event, make it in person. If you're going to conduct a virtual event, make it virtual. Try combining the two is just a potential for a disaster, because neither one, you get two problems and you modify it. So from my perspective, that's another important lesson if you're thinking about this. The second one is pre-record. Even if you're doing a virtual, pre-record, because I've been in too many of these events where there's technical problems and there's hundreds of people sitting there saying, is this going to ever end? And it don't matter. If you're doing something virtual, you're going to have production problems. And so what we've done is pre-recorded everything and then stream it out when the time is coming. Well, that's what Hollywood and Netflix and everyone else does now anyway. The next one is, and I can't stress this enough, having an in-person and a virtual event complicates things, and it's more than just double. And I think clearly think through these options and stuff and what it would take, and as Desi said, not only in budget but just in staff exhaustion, and then being aware of those uncertainties. Today's right answer will be next week's wrong answer, and so I think that's really important. And it's always true in conferences, but particularly in times such as we were in with the pandemic. And then finally is be flexible. You do not control events. The events are controlling you. And it's really tough, particularly on public health, because as Emma pointed, you get new directives coming in from the public health sector that change week by week, if not daily. And so you've got to be flexible enough to meet that. And one of the things I think is important, and I think maybe we could do a better job on, is that we got to be transparent. We got to be able to, as live as we can, real as time as possible, know that let the people who are planning on coming know what the rules are. And one of the things we're working now is in our conference website, which I think really a compliment to the city of Houston, is their public health department has a live web update. So they actually come and show real time what is the public health department of the city of Austin is recommending. And we want to get this in front of the attendees or people who are planning to come, so they are aware before they get in that car or the Uber and head to the airport. And so I think that's all important. The other thing we've done that I might throw in that's interesting is that when this idea that Desi mentioned is that the long lines, but on the other hand, protecting staff and stuff like that. Pretty much our registration is all done by kiosk now. And one of the things that we threw in, and we've not really had a registration for the live event, there is not going to be any in-person registration. You have to register in advance. And one of the things that we do is, as you come in and put your put your ID in to get your badges, it asks the same questions that you get at the when you buy a ticket, when you check in for an airplane. Have you had any symptoms lately? Have you been tested? You know, those kind of things. And if you answer any of those questions, yes, then like in the airplane, what it will do is say that you need to, you can't register right now. And here's a phone number for public health where you can do it. And so the main thing is to give them one more, that's another last gatekeeper. And then, we expect it, we're depending on people's honesty, but at least it does give a sense that there is responsibility of conference goers. And if you are picked up something, you need to recognize that. And also one of the things we're working with the hotel is to quarantine if you do actually come up and find that you're there and you test positive. And it's a tough time right now because I've gone around in my mind a number of things because of this variant is so widespread and hits so fast. The consideration of, well, maybe should we have more test kits available and stuff like that. But that's running counter right now because of everything else in our supply chain, there's not enough test kits out. And most doctors I've talked to is saying, if you don't have to test, don't. Because there is people who need that test. Hospitals, they're running short in hospitals, they're running short in schools. And so we're encouraging people to test, but that was a tough decision that got to go. Fortunately, we will put information in for people who feel that they may have it. Fortunately, we're in a downtown situation and there are places where you can get test kits. So those are sort of my combination of lessons to be learned, but I just couldn't figure out which of those were more important than the others, so I threw them in.
No, those are all wonderful. And yeah, I think the more information you can provide, the better. I think what you're talking about, Steve, is we have basically been working on poking holes in the entire process from when you register, can you pay before you're vaccine verified? When you check in, how are you going to be able to get your badge without having a ton of contact with people or setting up rooms? So we're going to look at setting up times for people to come pick up their badges so we can put in those 6-foot distancing measures, working with the hotel to figure out your room layout. If you want to space out, usually rounds are the best way to set your tables and conserve space so you can still have people in the room safely. So many great ideas. And Desi, kind of taking it back to you, how do you determine what is best for your group? Some group members, we've been to events where there's zero protocol, RESNET's doing very stringent protocol. Kind of where do you start and how do you work with the venue and other providers to figure out what's going to be the best fit and how do you communicate that to your attendees?
You've got to find out where everybody's at first and foremost, and then of course work within, like the local guidelines. And so, for example, Texas, let's say I'll give you two drastically different scenarios. Texas, Arizona, if you want, actually, some city like Austin, Texas, right, is doing, I think, a little bit more than the other cities from that perspective. But Arizona, where I am, there are no requirements. And from a vaccine perspective or masking or anything like that, capacity, nothing. And then, talking to some friends in Chicago, having a conference out there, for example, vaccine requirements, mask requirements, indoors, and from either perspective, if you're someone coming from Arizona traveling to Chicago for a conference, that could feel very, very strong and offensive to you. And on the flip side, if you're someone that lives in, like a Chicago and you're coming to Arizona, you're probably going to have a little deer in the headlights look, right? So thinking about your demographic of your attendees and over communicating, because to Steve's point, people are going to make a decision based on what your protocols are. If they think they're too much, then they might decide not to come. If they think they're not enough, then they might decide not to come. So making sure that that information is in hand and updated as much as possible to the best of your ability, knowing that there's going to have to be, flexible, like, possible flexible options as you move forward. And just kind of, I don't know, focusing on that and then keeping everybody informed and communicating in different ways, because not everybody reads their email, or they get so many emails that they're not actually reading the information that's contained in those emails, or we're too wordy, right? Maybe we're putting too much information that it's not, possible for people to actually digest that much info. So I think as many ways as you can communicate, people, social media, if that's possible, internal, communications like portals and intranets, Twitter, right, Facebook, all of those different things, maybe video chats and maybe kind of meetups, to talk about those kinds of things. If you do kind of a monthly call or something like that, that would be a great way to engage everybody. And, some thoughts, advice-wise, Steve, I like where your head's at. And I would say, Emma, you're spot on. Overanalyze everything when you're going through the planning process, and think about how long things are going to take and how many people it's going to take to make that happen. And if you have that, or if you're going to need to add more staff in order to make things happen, because you're already probably working very hard at the conference, and now we've got this COVID layer that we're adding onto the planners' jobs, right, which is a lot. But I would say have confidence and just know that you're probably going to get some complaints either way, no matter which way you go when you're on site. But the majority of the people that attend, they're attending because they're super excited to be there, and they're going to have a great time, and it's going to feel really good for them to meet and to network and to see their peers and to learn. And so just, have the confidence in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Desi, I'm going to ask you one more question, then Steve, I have a question for you. Thinking of worst case scenario, somebody comes to your event and they start to feel sick. What do event planners need to do when that person reports it, and what is the best way for that person to report it?
So there's lots of options, you can explore. I think you need to decide as the conference organizer first what you plan to do with that information. Our company opinion is that you should inform that there has been an exposure, but it is our opinion that you don't necessarily disclose who that is, because privacy is extremely important. That's, like I said, our opinion. We've seen customers do all sorts of different things. You can set up, an anonymous line or whatnot where people can report in and just let you know, and maybe they can report in on where they've been, and you can try to explore that anonymously a little bit. But I think letting people know, and I think also being very careful with how you craft your communications, and doing that before you get on site, and making sure that everybody is on the same page with how you're executing that communication, because the last thing that you want to do is induce fear. And so there's definitely an approach to how you let everybody know maybe that there has been an exposure, and what you do with that, and your last thing you want is for people to freak out, right? Let's just be mindful, and let's not be dramatic and emotional, and let's look at this as, the public health situation that it is. And if you had not had tight protocols, maybe that's time to tighten them up, and to inform everyone that here's the direction going forward now, because you're concerned. That does, look like you're just responding, so it's not necessarily a thoughtful way to go, but I've seen that happen. And just making sure you know what you're doing in advance, and seeing if you've got the opportunity to get a discounted rate, maybe at the hotel, and they can stay there, or if they need to go over to a extended stay. Now the quarantine is like 5 days after symptoms have subsided, and then another 5 days with a mask. So then right now, after 5 days, you could technically get on an airplane and it would be okay, because they're saying you can be out and about, and I believe this is if you're vaccinated. So those are some things to do, to consider as well. If you're testing, as Steve mentioned, testing is potentially a challenge right now. So even myself personally, my son, I had I had one at-home test kit left, and I was wondering if he was worthy, and sure enough, he sure was. So he tested positive just on Monday, and thankfully, I'm just going to run the timeout because I look at the testing availability right now, and I can't get one for another 5 days, and then I already know he's got it, so I'm just going to let him do his quarantine and support that, so we're not taking up another test that doesn't need to be taken up, right? But people, it's kind of scary. And I'll also add that there's not just COVID out there. There's the flu, there's strep throat, there's other respiratory illnesses. I had something in December for about 10, 12 days, never tested positive for COVID. It was something completely different, but I had the same symptoms. And so it's like, if you're not feeling well, period, you shouldn't be out and about, and you should definitely isolate in your room and keep your distance as much as possible.
Absolutely. I think a lot of it comes down to personal responsibility. You're inheriting the risk of attending an event. You can catch any kind of disease from an airport, the Uber to your hotel, the conference venue, going home, from your kids who, saw you the week before, right before you went to this conference.
Emma, I'd like to add on that. A conference is not a nanny state. We can do what we can to keep things healthy. One of the things we're doing in our conference is we're limiting alcohol consumption at sponsored events, but we're smack down in the downtown Austin with the bars and the music and every stuff wild, and we just simply can't control that. And so that's one of the uncontrolled parts about it. But I think the main thing is to keep on stressing the responsibility. And I like your line, Desi. If you're not feeling well, no matter what it is, stay in your room, and hopefully by February the kits will be more available. But even still, they know what the symptoms are. You can judge yourself. I think a lot of people now, if they get a cough, they're thinking they may have COVID, but it's still, use some common sense. And there's, we can only do so much as conference organizers to keep you safe and healthy.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of responsibility though is on yourself, and just use common sense. And if you're not, and again, as you say, Desi, if you're not feeling well, stay in your room.
Absolutely. Steve, kind of to follow up on that, what are the things that you're communicating to RESNET internal team? How are you, thinking of when I attend a conference, you look at the board, you look at the staff, kind of what they're doing. A lot of people will follow lead. So what are you communicating to your internal network on how they should,
Well,
act?
first of all, we require that all staff and board members that the attendees have. They have to have proof of vaccination, and then they will do the best practices. If, for instance, we are not going to require masks, but the city health department suggests that you do, staff would be wearing, and board members would be wearing masks as sort of nothing else as a leadership function. I think that that's the main things. And the other thing we did, again, though, is we told our staff, if you're not comfortable traveling, then you do not have to attend. So we gave them a chance, and you could participate and give your presentations via the virtual. And so I think the main thing that we've done is every step of the process as we gone forward is we shared with staff what we were thinking, what were considerations, what the results were, and then particularly after the board made its decision. But I do think that to me is what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and that if you're setting rules, of all people, staff should be a leadership role, not an exemption.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Desi, thinking about communication, I know that ECI has just basically held our hand from everything that we've communicated to attendees because we want to be sensitive to everybody's opinions about COVID, about vaccines, about coming to this conference. What is some language that you would encourage, and what is some language that you would avoid?
Not the communication. Well, I would say in no communication would I ever include the word safe. I feel like safe, you can't promise any kind of safety. And as we've talked about, just today, making sure that the attendee understands that they are traveling and attending at their own risk. And this is a community spread public health situation. And one thing that I don't love is conferences are trying to measure their success by how many COVID positive cases get reported in, and that is an impossible measurement because you don't know where it came from from the home on the way there, got it after, from the bar, even though the meeting organizer was tight on protocols. And so that's not a good measure of success. But I think avoiding the word safe, I think that also asking, inviting, and encouraging the attendees to understand that you need their help in supporting the overall well-being of the event. Because you're right, Steve, it's not, you can't nanny adults, right? And so at the end of the day, if you put forth a set of protocols, let's just follow the protocols, right? We all want to be at the conference and attend. And so let's make sure that we understand that it really is in our power as attendees to kind of make or break the success based on, what we're putting out there. So that would be some of my advice. And I would say, pre-draft your communications for anything that you're going to send on site beforehand. So that way you're not doing triggering an emotional response for yourself. If you're a little stressed out and you think, oh goodness, someone got sick, or I need to report something out, and now your kind of fight or flight is taken over, you're freaking out a little bit, and you want to be in a calm, rational place before you even get those communications out to everybody. And I like transparency as well, and being diplomatic and not being dramatic about, anything, just information. Here's what we're doing, and maybe here's why, or maybe why not, because at the end of the day, you're the conference organizer and you get to decide how you want to run your conference, right? So yeah, my advice.
That's wonderful advice. And I love the personal responsibility and also encouraging people. I think that people have best intentions in mind, even if they might not follow the policy. I think that, people really don't want to hurt other people. Good people don't want to hurt other people, and generally it's good people going to your events. So thinking about who you're going to reference, and Steve, you've talked about how we work with ECI, and ECI is kind of our consult. So Desi, I guess this question would kind of fall for you. I'm looking at the people who registered, and we have events ranging from this Friday in Montana to June in Nevada. We have events in April in Michigan. So they're all different dates, all different states. What is your best recommendation for finding the most up-to-date information, and thinking about when we communicate, we have signage and stuff that you need to print a couple weeks before. So what is your recommendation of the best guidelines to follow from government organizations, from health organizations? What is your recommendation?
I think, following what the CDC is, putting out there is important, although we've all decided and shared that it has been a little bit challenging to understand, and everybody's got a little bit of a different interpretation of that. So I think the local guidelines are going to be extremely important as well, because, for example, if you are going somewhere where they are requiring your attendees to have vaccines in order to even get in the convention center or get in the hotel, which I've seen, that people are going to need to know that, because that in itself might make their decision for them whether they can or will attend. And beyond that, I'm not totally a fan of knee-jerk reacting and sharing something as soon as it comes out, because it could change. And I think you want to look at, if you're changing your protocols every month, right, depending on how far out your conference is, that's something that I would look at. Definitely communicate, but make sure that you're giving a little bit of buffer between having that reaction happen and then seeing what actually goes, what actually happens after that, because that, has been a challenge where people kind of lash out and put hard mask requirements in place, and then they loosen up on it, and your communication was, okay, guys, here's what we're seeing, and they're like, okay, we're not coming. And now 3 weeks later, it's a totally different situation. So you've kind of got to weigh all of those odds, but I think you have to put it all together. It's going to have to be, all pieces are part of the picture. Your local, your hotel, CDC, and then your own, risk tolerance as the organizer.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think one of the things that I think, and Steve, maybe I'll have you speak on this more, but when we were looking at, who do we reference, I think ECI has been a valuable partner for us in terms of, Desi, you kind of being the overseer, taking kind of the risk and liability of, like, RESNET is working with ECI to create this, but ECI is kind of providing the guidance. We're not just kind of, because if you look at the event in Austin, we have Austin protocol, which is very different than Texas protocol, which is very different than CDC protocol. So kind of figuring out how to navigate that. Steve, what was kind of your decision process in contracting with ECI and developing this relationship and these protocols?
It was a realization that we were not experts in public health, and that we knew it was fraught with political landmines every which way you could look. And then I think a commitment from the organization is that we wanted to do right. And if we were going to err, we would err on public safety, and I should say public health. And so within those constraints, it became really fast, and thank for you, Emma, that you did the homework you did, that we needed an outside expert. We needed someone that we could rely upon. And also, and as you mentioned a little bit, it gave us political cover too, because it wasn't like Steve woke up one morning and now you all have to wear a mask. It's more that it was an outside expert who was suggesting that these would be the what we used to call initially, and it's still changing so fast, was best practices. Instead of safety, these are the best practices. And so if you're going to do best practices, you would rely upon a firm that does that. And I have to say that it's relieved a lot of sleepless nights. But I want to go one thing you said, Des, that's true. You need to plan as much as possible before, because decision making in the middle of a conference is the worst possible decision making you can make. You're under high stress anyway. You're probably not having the sleep you need, and you're getting bombarded with thousands of little details, including people don't like what their lunch is, or a speaker didn't show up, or this or that. And it's terrible to do strategic decision making on the fly, because it's usually going to be wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, Desi, we even talked last week about having, just thinking worst case scenario, somebody gets sick, somebody reports it to us, what is the text number that we're going to have set up that they can anonymously report it? And how are we going to communicate that? We're going to have that message drafted. So, when you're on site at an event, and I can, it's a lot of sleepless nights, you're not getting a lot of sleep, you're running around with your head cut off pretty much, depending on how big your event is. Sometimes matters, but usually event planning is just kind of a stressful gig. So the more prepared and more foresight that you can have, I think the better. Kind of diving into some of the questions, we got one question in the chat here, and Desi, I'm going to throw this one to you. Heaven forbid someone be walking around at the event sick but not reporting it. How do you address that, and how would you deal kind of with that awkward enforcement?
Well, I would ask, how would you know? I'm not sure that someone would know and share that and then attend. But if that were the case, I mean, I would certainly ask them to leave. Something that, when you're deciding kind of your protocols, a big consideration is going to be, what does non-compliance look like, and your enforcement for non-compliance, and making sure that, look at those worst case scenarios and decide how aggressive you're looking to go, and whether that's escalating it all the way to security, escorting them out, which could be, that could be very dramatic, right? So I think that, that's absolutely not okay. If you know that someone has it at your event and they're walking around, they should not be there. Absolutely, they should 100% be asked to leave. But I would say, there's got to be, if you have the opportunity to develop an escalation process in advance, if you think that's a possibility, that I would recommend that too, because once again, you're going to be in an emotional decision-making process where you're going to be upset and angry and might say some things that aren't nice, or, go about it the wrong way, and that sort of thing. So kind of trying to keep a little bit of the integrity of the conference intact and not causing a scene, and being as level-headed as possible.
I think that, and that's really wise. I think when you go back to why people want to be in in-person events, it shows that there is a sense of community, family, colleagues, mentors. And I think no one would consciously go out and try to hurt other people, particularly since they're traveling so far, and this is a chance for them to do their unwanted needs. Unmet needs because of the lockups of the previous year. I think that there is some amount of trust you can have, but I think you're right, you need to plan for it. But I wouldn't thread over eyes, because when you think about it, most industries are a family, and they're there for a purpose, and they respect one another. And so I think you can put a certain amount of faith that they will do the right thing. And it's just, again, back to education. We need to tell someone, if you think you have the symptoms, you need to let people know.
Absolutely. And I think making it accessible and easy for them to submit that information so they don't have to feel embarrassed. I think in reducing the awkward encounter, I think two great things that RESNET and ECI have helped us implement for this Austin event is hiring security, first of all. Well, hiring ECI to kind of provide the recommendations for this and also to kind of help provide the guidance. But I would say for the vaccine registration and security on site, that allows the buffer for any staff members to have to deal with an awkward encounter with a member that they're going to interact with. If you have kind of the temporary technology or people that can come on site and help enforce that, it helps just with the optics and kind of that awkward situation of maybe having to ask somebody to leave, or helping somebody in a situation where they show up without their vaccine card. You kind of have that buffer there.
You definitely want to, when you have the opportunity, have someone else be the bad guy, because you don't want to go damaging relationships in this process.
Yes.
Right.
And I think that, I think we're all okay being the bad guy every once in a while, but it's definitely when you're on site at events, that's one thing that you just don't want to have to worry about for sure.
Moving back, there's inherent risk at any conference that you're doing when you get people together. I mean, there's, the people could be confrontational, get in fights, do other things. And we've been fortunate. We've been doing this now since 2001, and we've not had an occurrence like that. And so I do have some sense of security, because, the industry is pretty close knit. They do support one another. And again, I call it more like a family, and that they would normally purposely do something that they would hurt someone else purposely. And that's where just the communications, and you came up some good ideas on how you could do that at the event, because you don't want to leave by any sense that you're the Gestapo and you're going to be watching, you're being watched. Big Brother's going to make sure that you're being accused. You have to have a certain amount of respect. And that's why, Emma, what you said before, that's why those upfront protocols are so important. Everyone knows what the rules are. They have to show it. You can't even get into the registration unless you do have the vaccination. And then my final thought is what you said, Desi, that stuck with me. You cannot guarantee safety. You just can't do it. It's just, life is full of risk. What you can do is, by following the best protocols, have the best public health protocol that you can possibly have.
Absolutely. I think you always just have to think about the greater good. And historically, how do you want, if you're hosting an event and something does go wrong, the reputation will lie on how you handle it. I don't think anybody would blame an organization from a case that's contracted at an event, a situation that is just uncontrollable, but how you can only control how you react. And Steve, I think you and I were talking about, we just have to play the cards that we've been dealt. And so making, lemons out of lemonade, I am very excited for this event and want to make sure that both of you have an opportunity for the attendees to know how to follow up, or anything you would like to plug. So Steve, would you maybe mind starting and talk to your audience, maybe invite them to the conference, and then if people had questions for RESNET, how would they reach RESNET?
I think, excuse me, I think that everyone's invited, as long as you have the protocols. We are still taking registrations. But I think the main thing is, if people have any questions, to contact. We have a information website, an email, info@resnet.us, that they can come with not only questions about this, but questions about anything. And our communication director monitors that, and she's been really good responding to information, or if she doesn't have information, tying in someone else. That's the easiest probably way to do it. And particularly as you get closer to the conference, phone calls and texting is going to get more and more difficult, because the bandwidth is going to get smaller. So the best thing is sending the email for information you're looking for at info@resnet.us.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And we do have the conference at resnet.us. I see Valerie's on.
Oh, I'm sorry. There you go.
Right now, she's probably like, don't email me. No, I'm just kidding. Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. Desi, can you talk about if anybody's interested in working with ECI to help plan their event protocol and guidance that you've provided for RESNET? What is the best way to find ECI?
Yeah, for sure. So you can visit our website, emergencyconcierge.net, or send an email to info@emergencyconcierge.net. That's a long domain name, and we apologize for that. So just double check the spelling to make sure it's right. But you know, we can support conferences from our COVID response plan, communications. We do virtual support while a conference is happening, and all hazards, emergency planning, and just a whole lot of skill set opportunities under our belt. So if you are curious, just ask.
I want to kind of do 2 plugs here because it really is important and it's helped me be able to sleep at night. And that is, Desi's been easy to work with. She's been really transparent with us, and we are heavily relying upon our protocols, and we were able to do it early enough. And then she's been very responsive in terms of when issues come up or questions come up with that. And then the other one is a plug is NPR. I mean, I have thrown Emma several loops through this past conferences because conditions changed. And I have to say the whole team at NPR are very qualified and easy to work with. So if you're having a conference and you're looking for a conference organizer, I would contact Emma.
Thank you, Steve.
I know, I'm so flattered. Thank you both so much. What I will do is I will also follow up with the attendees. I know that was a lot of information. We don't have anything up on the screen. We wanted this to just be a panel discussion to help answer and provide information to you to host a as safe as possible, best smart event. So I'll send a follow-up, and I also created kind of a 10 question guide of like, what are the 10 questions you need to be considering right now hosting an event during the pandemic. But I'll include contact information in the websites for all of the organizations. As Steve said, along with webinars, we also do event planning, and that goes from virtual, in-person, hybrid, whatever you're looking for. So want to give a last chance for any questions, but would like to thank everybody for attending the webinar. Steve, Desi, cannot thank you enough for both joining on and sharing, you know, what you're going through as we're all trying to navigate this together.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining the 501 cast.